Hello, or as we say here in College Station, Texas, howdy, I'm Crosby. Welcome to the second program of our Environmental Awareness video series. This video is brought to you by the Bush Education Department at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum in College Station, Texas. Visuals used in this program will come with audio descriptions. The theme today is the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, which was signed into law by President George H.W. Bush in 1989. Now here's our friend Santiago with the lesson.
Howdy everyone, I'm Santiago, and for today's lesson we will be talking about America's wetlands and the Northern American Wetland Conservation Act, which was supported by President George H.W. Bush. First, let's talk about what wetlands are. Now, wetlands are any form of land that has water near the surface or covering most of the ground during certain periods of the year or all year round.
I've included a gorgeous picture of a wetland with wildlife, plants, and animals coexisting, just so you would get a better picture of what it would look like for a wetland to exist in the wild.
The amount of water in the soil can let you sort of identify which type of plants and animals live in these wetlands. Usually, wetlands support both land and water species. These species are known as terrestrial and aquatic. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, states that there are two general types of wetlands. There are coastal wetlands and tidal wetlands.
I have included a picture of the U.S. with a map of all the coastal wetlands as well as some of the inland wetlands. I have also included a diagram of what a wetland bank would look like when water goes from the inland to the ocean or sea.
The coastal, or otherwise known as tidal wetlands, and the inland, or non-tidal wetlands. Now, the coastal wetlands can be found across the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Alcan, and the Gulf Coast, anywhere near any type of ocean. These coastal wetlands are linked to the U.S.'s estuaries, where saltwater and freshwater mix to form sort of a blackish water that has varying levels of salinity, or saltiness. Due to the amount of salt and the varying levels of water due to the tides, it is hard for most plants to survive in this environment. There are areas where usually it's very muddy or sandy. However, there are some plants that have adapted to live in the saltwater marshes where it's very groggy, there's high levels of salt water, and there's generally very little soil, such as cordgrass, which we will talk about later.
I have included a picture of what it would look like when fresh water and salt water mix, sort of this brownish, blackish mixture of water.
And there are also trees that love salt water and live in swamps that can be found very commonly in Florida and Louisiana.
I have included a picture of the wetlands in Louisiana. I have included a picture of an inland wetland as well as all the marsh and gunk that you would normally find on it.
Now, inward wetlands are usually found around the floodplains of streams and rivers, around the lakes or ponds, or other areas where there's low-lying water and sort of overtly saturated soil. So it's very, very wet, but there's not really a massive body of water like an ocean, and there's no saltiness. These wetlands are typically seasonal and will dry up during different seasons of the year.
I have included a better diagram of the U.S., mainly the western coast, of all the wetlands that connect to the sea, aka the coastal wetland.
The amount of water present in these wetlands determines how important they are to the environment. Different types of species may rely on these wetlands, where others will thrive when these wetlands are dry.
I have included another diagram of what a watershed would look like, mainly just a runoff that leads into the ocean.
Overall, wetlands are extremely important for various living species, such as alligators. Wetlands and coastal erosion cause these species that depend on the wetland to be at increased risks because they can no longer get access to that water, those nutrients, that environment that they needed to. Now we will discuss what wetlands and coastal erosions are, but for right now all you need to know is that it's generally bad for the species that live in wetlands.
I have included two pictures, one of a normal wetland that's gorgeous and beautiful, and two of a coastal wetland that's been eroded plenty.
America's wetlands have been disappearing for years now. Wetland loss happens because there are some things that humans do that have created major issues, such as climate change and building cities over these wetlands that causes all these species that rely on them to no longer be able to live in them. Urbanization just means that cities are increasing and the population size increases, and so the amount of land that we use to form the cities increases as well. And so we sort of drive out these species.
I have included two pictures. One on the left side of what the bank that leads from the wetland into the ocean would look like, a nice open body of water where lots of people can use, and two, one on the right side of urbanization.
It also means that there are more and more cities popping up. And because of this, a large amount of wetlands have been dried up and converted to businesses and homes. The removal of wetlands is known as dredging.
I have included another picture of what urbanization and channelization would look like when water crosses through a ravine in a city.
With the major trends in urbanization come other forms of wetland loss, such as pollution, which pollutes the water, soil, and air, which the plants and wildlife normally depend on. Humans also love to trade when they're in large urban cities, and by trading from city to city, they need large ships, which pollute the water, and also require channels to be built. And in order to create these channels, we destroy swamps and marshes and other wetlands. And this process is called channelization. It's slowly killing wildlife and wetlands along in the process. And by creating more channels, we're also letting more saltwater intrude into that freshwater. And when the mixing of the saltwater and freshwater occurs, the salinity or saltiness of the water increases. And so plants and wildlife that normally relied on freshwater can't survive anymore.
Another picture of what it would look like when seawater and freshwater mix, except this one depicts a well and how the well is preventing some of that mixture.
Humans have also created levees to prevent flooding from rivers. However, by doing so, they deprive nutrient-rich sediments from freshwater, and so the wetland can no longer get the nutrients it needs in the soil to provide for the plants and animals that sustain off of it.
I have put a picture of what a floor plane and channelization can do to a wetland, sort of the division of that land in order for water to flow in a more convenient way for humanity.
There are also natural causes for wetland and coastal erosion. These include hurricanes and major storms, which destroy the coast, droughts, which dry up wetlands for longer than the seasonal period, rising sea levels, which actually are caused by global warming. And this is important because, again, if you have rising sea levels, you have more salt in the water. More salt in the water, and some plants and animals can't survive. And lastly, erosion, which is a natural process. And since rain and tidal waves and wind action all cause it, they tear down soil that was supported by plants, and those plants and wetlands can no longer survive.
I have included two pictures, one picture of Hurricane Katrina, and the other one picture of some of the damage it caused to its citizens and residents. In total, about 35% of the world's wetlands were lost from 1970 to 2015, according to the United Nations, and the rate of loss has been increasing since the 2000s. This is a problem because 40% of the animals in the world live on wetlands, and now about 25% of all wetland plants and animals in the world are facing extinction, according to the United Nations. I have included a graph that depicts the loss of wetlands as well as their gains over time. This is why the Northern American Wetlands Conservation Act, or the NAWCA, of 1989 is so important. In this photo, President Bush is talking to the students about wetlands. The NAWCA was passed by President George H.W. Bush. This act supported and protected wetlands and their habitats for birds to migrate, as well as other various wetland wildlife, such as ducks, alligators, cordgrass, plants, animals, you name it, in the US, Mexico, and Canada. I have included a picture of President George H.W. Bush. The national government will give grants or money to approved causes to state and local governments, private businesses and nonprofits, as well as charities, or organizations that design and provide ways to protect wetlands. All these different government grants have all been provided by the Northern American Wetlands Act of 1989. I have included a picture of money as well as a calculator to emphasize what funds do for projects as well as the environment. I've included a picture of a wildlife biologist and her efforts to conserve the wetlands. And it's very important because since the beginning of the Act, there have been over 2,500 different projects started across North America, with over 6,000 different partners. As of 2018, there have been nearly 3 million acres of land in the U.S. that have been conserved thanks to this historic act and the president that passed it. That's over 22,727 Kyle fields, or about 3.2 million Olsen fields. I've included a picture of a football field, just so you get sort of an image of how big the land saved was. The NAWC Act impacts states across the country in different ways, as different types of wetlands across the U.S. have different issues. For example, Louisiana is losing 19 acres of wetland on a daily basis. There have been over 1.2 million acres of wetland lost due to various factors like channelization, urbanization, saltwater intrusion, hurricanes, storms, as we've mentioned earlier, since the 1930s in Louisiana. It is also estimated that within the next 50 years, there will be the same amount of loss if we do nothing to protect these wetlands. I have included a picture of what coastal eroding can do to land and wetland alike. I have included a picture of bird migration, mainly during the summer. Due to this loss of wetlands, migratory birds who were used to settling in Louisiana are not able to settle there as there is no space, and may die by looking for new areas to settle and finding nothing, no food, no water, no habitat, no resources. The coast is also getting closer and closer to major cities in these states, which reduces the amount of wetlands on the coast. Since the NAWC Act was started, Louisiana has conserved, in other words protected, nearly 800,000 acres of wetlands. In Hawaii, wetland conservation projects are centered on creating environments that will recover 4 major bird species that are facing extinction in this state. I have included a picture of birds migrating to and staying on firm land. In total, there has been over 9,000 acres of land saved in Hawaii. In New York, there are wetland conservation projects that are focused on protecting inland wetlands. These projects are guided towards protecting all ducks, geese, and birds that like to migrate. Over 92,000 acres of wetlands have been saved in New York alone. I have included a picture with a bird's eye view. In Arizona, there are projects for restoring seasonal wetlands for ducks, which like to migrate towards them near the winter. I have included a picture of wildlife coexisting and drinking from wetlands. Overall, the success of the North America Wetlands Conservation Act, passed by President George H.W. Bush, saw it reauthorized in 2007, and will likely be reauthorized again as there has been a continued progress in saving wetlands. I have included a picture of the 41st and 43rd President, George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush, as well as President Obama. Not only will this impact humans who are hired to work on these projects, enjoy the outdoors like fishing and hunting, but it will also support wetland species such as alligators and cordgrass. I've included a picture of a wetland with cordgrass. Cordgrass, also known as spartina, is a long, wiry type of grass that grows across coastal salt marshes. Cordgrass can also grow in freshwater, but it prefers saltwater. It is important to wetlands because it acts as a protective barrier to coastal erosion. The cordgrass is a very complex root system, which helps prevent erosion from reaching shorelines. Cordgrass also filters out harmful toxins, metal sediments from reaching wetlands and killing them. As mentioned before, saltwater can erode wetlands, so having cordgrass growing in marshes and preventing saltwater from eroding is great. Cordgrass can also filter out salt from saltwater, making it fresh through its leaves. I have included a better picture of cordgrass so you get a better idea of what it would look like. Through the NAWC Act, passed by President Bush, projects have been created to plant more cordgrass in marshes to protect wetlands from erosion. Other projects that are not part of the NAWC Act have also focused on planting cordgrass to protect, again, wetlands, as it's a natural way to save wetlands from eroding. I have included a picture of wildlife as well as wetland conservation project where they aim to plant cordgrass and maintain the wetland. By saving wetlands, we also save the animals that make wetlands their homes. For example, the American alligator is found in southern United States from North Carolina to Texas. They are commonly found in freshwater rivers that are slow-moving, but are also found in lakes, swamps, and marshes. I have included a picture of an alligator and what it would look like in the wild in a wetland. Male alligators tend to be larger than females. On average, males are around 11 feet long, while females, on average, are 8 feet long. Alligators have an armored and scaly body with very strong muscles. I have included a picture of the scales of an alligator so you get a better feel for its texture. They have 4 short legs. Their front legs have 5 toes, while their back legs only have 4 toes. Their noses face upwards, and so do their nostrils, so that they can breathe while resting the rest of their body underwater. Alligators have between 74 to 80 teeth at a time. And yes, they are carnivores. This means that they eat meat. They will eat anything in the water that gets too close to them or agitates the water's surface. I have included a picture of an alligator submerged in water, as well as eating prey, so you understand how they can coexist in water while breathing. Alligators actively feed mainly at night, dusk, or dawn. Therefore, Texas Parks and Wildlife recommends swimming only during the daytime hours and only in designated areas. I have included a picture which includes a sign of an alligator which warns bystanders that the waters have them. I have included another picture with an alligator. Alligators generally live around 50 years in the wild. Did you know that alligators have more than 3,000 teeth in their lifetime? After they wear down one tooth, another newer teeth grows back to replace it. Alligators can't live in saltwater, as their normal habitats are in freshwater wetlands. Because of this, if the wetlands are not conserved, alligator populations would be driven closer and closer towards the seawater as more and more seawater starts to seep into the wetlands. They would lose their homes and would likely go extinct. Alligators used to be considered on the brink of extinction, but because of conservation efforts, they have made major comebacks and now are classified as concerned for extinction. Now that we've completed talking about different types of wetlands, the Northern American Wetland Conservation Act, cordgrass, and alligators, it's time to do a fun little activity to discuss saltwater density, otherwise known as the level of saltwater in water. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Santiago. That was some really interesting information you brought up. Did you know that you can tell how big an alligator is depending on how far their eyes are away from each other? The further away an alligator's eyes are, the longer they are. As mentioned before, alligators cannot survive in salt water. This is why it is important to protect the wetlands so that saltwater does not enter them. Now here's our friend Ivy with a cool activity that describes saltwater density.
Hello and welcome to our salt density experiment. My name is Ivy, and I look forward to working with you today. To start, let us talk a little bit about density. Density is the amount of something in a space. For example, here we have a box and it is currently empty. There's nothing in this space. However, once we start adding some circles, we have something in the space. We have density. In this case, we have 8 circles in our box. Each circle currently has plenty of space to itself. We can say that the amount of circles in our box is not very dense. So let's go ahead and take a look at a second box. Now the box on the right has 56 circles in one box, compared to the one on the left that has 8 circles in one box. Each circle is now closer together and has less of its own space. The amount of circles in the right-hand box is more dense than the circles in the left-hand box. There is more of something to fill the space. Now, I want you to put on your science cap. We are going to make a hypothesis. A hypothesis being a guess about an outcome. Each of these boxes in your mind is now a glass of water, and the circles are pieces of salt. So the box of water on the left has less circles, less density, and less salt, while the box of water on the right has more density, more salt, and more circles. So now it is time to make our guess about an outcome. I want you to imagine 2 eggs. You are placing an egg in each of these boxes of water. Which box? The one with less density on the left or the one with more density on the right will better support an egg to float? Which box will support an egg into floating? Just take your best guess. Okay, whatever your answer is, left or right, that is your hypothesis. So you're making a guess if more salt density or less salt density will cause an egg to float. So now I want you to keep your hypothesis, your guess in mind. And like any good true scientist, we are going to do some experimenting to test it out. So for our testing, you will need the following materials. And I have images on screen of each of these. You'll need salt, water, a clear cup. In my case, I used a measuring cup, a spoon, eggs or grapes. Either will work, just use what you have on hand. And then lastly, though I don't have it pictured here, you will need adult supervision. Okay, well, with that said, let's go ahead and get started. First thing first, we are going to add plain water to our cup. I filled my measuring cup up to the 2-cup line. This water has no salt. It is like fresh water that you can find out in nature. Freshwater lakes and rivers have no salt. Next, we are going to add our egg. But before we do, I want you to think back to your hypothesis, to your guess. Will an egg float in less salt, in this case, no salt, or do you need lots of salt for an egg to float? Let's find out. And from my experiment, I observed that the egg has sunk. Did you observe the same when you did it? A good experiment can be repeated with the same results. So from this, we can observe that with no salt density, essentially a box with no circles in it, the egg sinks. What do you think caused the egg to sink? So now let us try something else. Let's go ahead and add salt. So this is the part where we're going to see some variation. You may have a different size egg than me, or are using a grape. Your spoon may also be a different size, so the amount of salt you pour in each time may vary from mine. That is all okay and perfectly normal in science experiments. The important thing is to make a note of what the differences are and then to think about how that might affect the end result. So on screen, we have a picture of my measuring cup filled to the 2-cup mark with fresh water, same as last time. Then there is a plus sign, an image of my salt bottle, and a picture of a spoon. Every spoon I add to the screen represents me adding a spoonful of salt to my cup. This is how I kept track. You can keep track how you would like, but please do keep track. It will be fun to know how our results differ because of the equipment. So please gently, with adult supervision, take your egg from your clear cup or prepare a new cup, then add your first spoonful of salt. Stir the water gently until the salt has completely dissolved and disappeared into the water. Now, you will gently, with adult supervision, place the egg back into the water. What happens? Very likely, the egg is still sunk to the bottom of your cup. That's okay. That just means the egg has more density, more stuff inside it compared to the density of the salt water. That just means we need to add more salt. So gently take out your egg and add your second spoonful of salt in the same way. Once it is dissolved again, add your egg back in. What happens? Depending on the size of your spoonful of salt, we may begin to see movement. Personally, my egg in the picture is still at the bottom. That's fine. There is more salt in the ocean than currently in my cup. Now that's a thought. We know an egg has a higher density than freshwater and will sink in freshwater. Do you think if we keep adding salt, mimicking the ocean, our egg will eventually float? Many things float in the ocean. The salt in the water takes up more space than other things and pushes them right up to the top to float. So let's keep trying and add our third spoonful. Okay, so my egg is still sunk, but I have a feeling that if your spoon is bigger than mine, we have some floating eggs. Let me add another spoonful to see if I can join you. Now remember, some of us may be using a grape instead. Keep track of your spoonfuls of salt so we can compare results. And there we are. At the 4-spoon mark, my egg has begun to float. Keep adding salt as needed, continuing to be gentle with your egg or grape, and taking notes as needed. Those notes will be useful if you want to try this experiment again or try with a different object, like a blueberry or orange slice. Your results may vary. So let us talk a little bit more about what is happening with the egg and its floating. On this slide, I have 3 pictures. On the left-hand side is the egg floating in the water from the 4 spoonfuls of salt. On the top right is a picture of when I decided to see what would happen if I kept adding more and more salt. That picture shows about 10 spoonfuls of salt. The egg kept floating and the water became cloudy. It became so full of salt that it reached the point where no more salt could be added, and the extra salt just fell to the bottom of my cup. So, at the maximum salt density, the egg still floats. On the bottom right is our image of the box densely packed with circles. These circles represent the salt that holds the egg up to float. While the egg has stuff inside it too, it is less dense, less full. So it is pushed up by all that compacted, densely packed together salt to float. So we have essentially experimented with the differences between fresh water that has no salt, like a freshwater river or lake, and ocean water that is full of salt. We know from our earlier lesson that the amount of salt in the water affects both the plants and animals that live in the area, and that too much or too little salt density can hurt the wildlife. However, let us talk real quickly about a third category known as brackish water. Brackish water is a water source that is somewhat salty. It lives in the space between ocean water and fresh water. I have an image of a South Carolina beach at sunset on the left-hand side to represent our ocean water, and on the right-hand side I have a small freshwater creek from North Carolina. And in between that is a circle that represents the brackish water that is a mix of both salt water, like the ocean, and fresh water, like the creek. Think about where the mouth of a freshwater river meets the saltwater ocean. Where that water mixes is known as brackish water. Similarly, coastal marshes near an ocean, can be a brackish area where freshwater and ocean water mix. They are somewhat salty, but less salty than the ocean and more salty than freshwater. They are the in-between. Many animals live there or go there just to visit. For example, an alligator is a freshwater animal, but much like how we can go and play in the ocean water for a little while, an alligator can go into brackish marshland for food. They cannot stay there long because they are not adapted to the salt, but they can visit. Similarly, while it's not common, a shark can and will go visit brackish water too. So it is possible to see a shark while visiting out in the coastal marshlands, if those marshlands are near an ocean. We have seen from our egg experiment that salt has a real and physical effect on objects, such as causing them to float or not. Some plants and animals are able to handle a salty environment, and some are not. Some plants and animals like salt, but not too much. It is very much a Goldilocks situation, and that's why knowing the salt levels in and around an environment is so important. Which leads me to my challenge for you. I want you to experiment with the amount of salt you add to water. In the picture on the right, I have an egg floating in the middle of the water, not touching the top or the bottom. On the left, we have our example of our low density box filled with 8 circles. Like in the picture and the example box, I challenge you to change the density of salt in the water just enough that the egg floats but stays in the middle, just like our somewhat salty, brackish water. Good luck.
Thanks, Ivy. I'll definitely be trying this experiment out with various different objects to see if they'll float in salt water. I'll transition back to you for our final section of our program, the craft section.
Hello and welcome to the craft section of our video. I hope you had fun and learned plenty from doing the salt density activity. This is Ivy, and I will be working with you on the craft as well. Today, we are going to make some coffee filter flowers. This is a really fun activity, though it can be a little bit messy, so I definitely recommend having some paper towel on hand to place underneath your work surface. Okay, with that said, let us go ahead and get started. So first thing first, we have some materials that you'll need today. Those include some paper, markers, glue. This can be the stick glue, this can be the liquid glue, and if you don't have either of those, it can definitely be tape. Okay? Then you'll need some coffee filters, paper towels, and access to water. And the picture on the screen just shows those list of materials. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is spread open our coffee filter. So in the picture, I do not have a paper towel underneath my coffee filter or even computer paper, and that was my mistake. The color will bleed through because the coffee filter is thin. And the marker bleeding is exactly what we want. That is the artistic essence we are searching for. So definitely put some paper underneath. So as you can see at this point, I've started coloring on my coffee filter. So you guys are more than welcome to color along with me. Grab your favorite color and start coloring. Now for mine, I started doing an interesting pattern. I started switching out the colors. I have some purple and green here. And then I add in some red circles to go with my purple and green rectangles. Then I go ahead and add some orange triangles and some yellow rectangles. But you guys are welcome to have a completely different pattern. Just color in the coffee filter however you would like. I added some squiggly lines and some dots. The trick here is that you want to cover the coffee filter completely. The more marker ink we have on the coffee filter, the better it is. And you can see at this point, I've started realizing that the marker bleeds through a little bit and I put my paper underneath, so that was a good thing. And I hope you've already done so. So you're just going ahead and you're coloring and you're choosing your favorite colors. You can have some fun with this. Just know that yellow and red make orange. Yellow and blue make green. And red and blue make purple. So the idea is that we're going to have the colors bleed together by adding water. So you can make additional colors, again, by adding your primary colors together to make secondary colors, such as red and yellow make orange, very good, and then yellow and blue make green, alrighty, and then red and blue make purple. Now, it might be you have those markers on hand and you just want to use those colors, but you can see in mine I did decide to experiment a little bit. So in these squiggle marks in the picture, I have the blue squiggle and I have the red dots next to each other, and that's because I'm seeking that purple color. And beside that, I have some yellow lines that are crisscrossing, and I have the red dots going into that. And I put some more red lines on top of that just to try to seek out that orange color, especially with different amounts of yellow and red. I really was curious about what I would end up with. It's kind of a fun science experiment to add in, color theory experiment. You know, the amount of material and marker juice you put in, what is the result? So you're going along and you're adding in more colors. At this point on the screen, you're going to see that I have 2 coffee filters, because I decided I wanted to have 2 flowers for my final product. So you guys are also more than welcome to do more than one coffee filter, or you can stick to the one. It's all good. But the one on my right-hand side is the new coffee filter, and that I currently have just yellow lines on. And then as I go along, on the left side, I'm adding in some pink, some more patterning elements, and on the right side, I'm kind of sticking to that line idea, but I'm working with primary colors. I want to see what happens when all these colors blend together. So I added in some blue, and yellow and blue give us what color? Green. If we look a little closely, you can start to see some green coming in where the yellow and the blue lines overlap. So we do know it's a sound theory. Okay, and I'm continuing on. I'm adding in more colors to my coffee filter on the left-hand side. I added some purple in, thickening up my blue on my right-hand side coffee filter. I'm just having some fun with this. Now on the right-hand side, I'm adding in some red and more lines in different geometric patterns. So on the right-hand side, I'm definitely following more geometric lines, more straight edges. And on the left-hand side, I'm following more organic lines, such as curves and waves, things like that. And so it's a fun way to bring a little bit of math and science into your art sphere, just different little details. But of course, you are coloring your coffee filter how you would like. So I have some white space left on my coffee filters. So we're going to see what that causes. I don't know what the final result of that is going to be, but I do know I've finished coloring in my coffee filters. And I hope you have too. But if you need more time, you're more than welcome to pause the video and fill out some more coffee filters. Just color in as many as you'd like and then press play when you're ready to continue. Okay, so welcome back. Now for this part, you're going to want paper towel. Newspaper can also be an option, but have some paper towel on hand. Okay, so what I did is on the right-hand side of the screen, you should see my coffee filter, the one with all of the geometric lines, the primary colors, the red, yellow, and blue. And I have layered about 3 or 4 paper towels underneath it because we are about to have some water. So on the left-hand side of my screen, you can see my paper towel roll, and then on the right-hand side, you see my coffee filter with lots and lots of paper towels underneath. Okay, so for this step, you're going to start adding water on top of your coffee filters. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see my geometric coffee filter with the red, yellow, and blue primary colors. And it is very, very wet. On the right-hand side, you'll see my more organic, colorful coffee filter, and it is not fully wet yet. I'm still in the process of adding water at that point. But what I did is I grabbed a cup, I went over to my sink, filled the cup about halfway with water. You can always refill more later. Then I went back over to my project. I put my fingers inside the water, and then I dangled them over the coffee filter, letting water drip from my fingers onto the coffee filter. And in this way, I was able to control how much water I was putting on my coffee filter. Because you don't have to put all the water on there at once. You can take your time with it. Like you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, I took my time with it, and some areas are dry, some areas are wet. And in this next slide, you can see at this point, I took the water and I sprinkled it all over my coffee filters so they're completely saturated. That means they're soaked through. And at this point, I walked away. I walked away so I wouldn't touch them. I wouldn't mess with them because I had to leave them to dry. So I took my water cup with me, emptied out the extra in the sink, put it to the side, and then I waited a couple hours for my craft to completely dry. In the meantime, you may be able to see that the marker ink is going to go all over my paper towels. Okay, so this is why it's important to have those paper towels there, because that ink will bleed, which is exactly what we want to happen. It's just going to be a little bit messy. All right, but that's intentional. So on the next slide, you can see here that my coffee filters are dry at this point. So the one on the left was my geometric one, and it's where I was layering up the primary colors, hoping to get some mixing matching. So on the bottom part, Where my yellow and my blue touched, I actually can see some green, and it's really strong on the wrinkles, so that is my secondary color. And then above it, where my red and my yellow overlapped, I have some very rich orange. It looks more reddish, but if we look to the left-hand side, we can see that red is a little bit more pink over here, so that's the pure red, and then the red and yellow mixed together make this deeper orangish red. I was really happy with the result of that. It felt like a really good experiment. And then on the right-hand side, this is where I had all those colors mixed together, and I just have all sorts of colors here, a plethora of color, if you will, just tons of different options. And this one is just so colorful, and I love it. So I hope once yours finishes drying, you have just as amazing, if not better, results than I did. It's just super fun. Okay, so at this point, they're completely dry, so I can handle them. They're not cold to the touch. If they're still cold to the touch, that means they're still not done drying. They should just be room temperature. So here's what you do at that point. You're going to take one of your coffee filters, okay? And I've laid it out flat. Now, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see my coffee filter that's round and laid out flat with a vertical dotted line going through the center. This is my fold line, okay? So I'm going to fold my coffee filter in half, and you'll see the example on the right side of your screen. Next, I'm going to take my folded in half coffee filter, and you're going to see in the picture on the left-hand side, there is a horizontal dotted line. This is the fold line, and the result is on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, this is where it gets a little bit fun. You can decide exactly where you want to fold it from here. You can decide, I want to fold it some more. Or, oh no, I like it exactly where it is. Well, I myself decided I wanted to fold it just a little bit more. So I kind of adjusted my folds a little bit. And if you look here in this picture on the left-hand side, I have another fold line. It is not down the middle. Instead, I took the middle point and then I just shifted it to the left just a bit to a new angle, so about 1/4 in, and I folded it there. And on the right-hand side, you see the result of not folding it exactly in half, just folding it just slightly off from half. And I really like how it folded up, and you can see a yellow, a green, and orange color. I just think that's really exciting. So if you want to experiment with how you fold your flower together, please do so. You can even decide to not fold your flower at all and just have it lay completely flat on the page. All the options are open to you. Okay, so then what I did next. On the left-hand side of your screen, right here, you're going to see I put my coffee filters on a piece of paper. I decided, I'm going to decide my composition. That means deciding where I want things to go on a page. So in this case, I have my more open flower on top and my more closed flower on bottom. Then I took my stick glue and I glued it down. If you're using liquid glue, just stick to a couple dots of glue. Or if you're using tape, that's perfectly fine too. So then once it's on our page, we can decorate around it. Make sure to add a stem to your flower and then decide, do you want there to be any pollinators for your flower, such as a bee or a butterfly? Do you want there to be cordgrass around it? Do you want there to be other animals around, such as maybe a crab or a bird? Just fill in that page however you would like and give your beautiful coffee filter flowers a home. So that is it for this section. Thank you for taking the time to craft with me today. I hope you enjoyed.
Today we talked about multiple things: what wetland erosion is, natural and human-made forms of wetland erosion, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, and how George H.W. Bush impacted the wetlands, alligators and cordgrass, saltwater density, and how two different colors can combine and make a new color. From all of us at the Bush Education Department at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum in College Station, Texas, we thank you for joining us today. For more great content created by our education team, please visit www.bush41.org /education/overview.